We back. I did that so hopefully I don't get copyrighted on the other video. So
Egyptian creation myth. According to legend, the children of the sun god Viracocha stepped into the world through three mysterious openings in a mountain and gave rise to the Incan civilization.
In the creation story of the Incan people, the children of the sun, the Ayer brothers, came down through three portals, three windows, to begin the Incan people. The temple at Machu Picchu, with three windows, is said to represent this miraculous event.
The brothers were the offspring of the god Viracocha that seemed to have brought the first wisdom and knowledge and rudiments of civilization to the peoples of South America. And by simply looking through these three windows,
another asymmetrical trade-off. I'm not entirely sure the Israelis
until the end.
Welcome to the News Hour. Tonight, mediators in the Israel-Hamas war are working to win another extension of a 6-day-old pause in fighting. The current temporary ceasefire ends early tomorrow.
Israel says it's willing to continue the ceasefire if Hamas keeps releasing hostages. But Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also reaffirmed today his commitment to continue the war and seek the destruction of the terrorist group.
In the last few days, I've heard the question, if after this phase of returning our abductees is exhausted, will Israel return to fighting? So my answer is unequivocally yes. There is no chance that we won't resume the fighting until the end.
In the meantime, Hamas released 10 more Israeli hostages, including one with American citizenship. President Biden confirmed she is now safe in Egypt. Hamas also freed 2 Russian and 4 Thai nationals who were driven into Egypt. Israel was also releasing 30 Palestinians from jail, including 16 minors and 14 women. Hamas also claimed that the youngest hostage, 10-month-old Kfir Bibas, was killed in an Israeli bombing before the ceasefire. The group said that the child's 4-year-old brother and his mother also died. The Israeli military said it's now investigating that claim.
And in the West Bank, Palestinian health officials said Israeli troops killed 2 young boys during a raid in Jenin. They were identified as Adam Samer Al-Ghul, who was 8 years old, and Basel Suleiman Abu Al-Wafa, who was 15. The Israeli military did not confirm the shooting, but it did say troops killed 2 Islamic Jihad militants in a separate incident. Let's turn now to Aaron David Miller, Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and a longtime State Department official in both Democratic and Republican administrations. Thanks for being with us. As we reported, talks are ongoing to extend the pause in fighting to allow for the release of more hostages and Palestinians held by Israel. At this point, what are the prospects for another extension and what might it yield?
I think from the Israeli perspective, the Netanyahu government has no choice but to play Hamas's cool game. If in fact Hamas has additional women and children, perhaps a number in the vicinity of 20, I think the Israelis are perfectly prepared to continue the hostage for prisoner release. And diplomats, Americans, Qataris, Egyptians are still working perhaps on a broader set of exchanges that could involve adult males and females, reserve military, and active duty military that Hamas is holding. So I think it serves the interests right now of both Hamas and Israel if, in fact, you can create a predictable and reliable channel in coming days to continue the hostage for prisoner exchange. At some point, the string's going to be played out, however. There's no doubt about it.
Well, the military personnel who are being held hostage, the men young enough to be called up for military service, Hamas has said that it will demand a higher price for people who fall into those categories. What might that be?
You know, I think if past this prologue here, it's another asymmetrical trade. 1985 and 2011, Israelis traded, 2011 in particular, for the return of Gilad Shalit. It took 6 years to produce it. In 2011, the Israelis traded 1,079 Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails for Shalit's return. So I think the price, I don't know what the ratio would be, but it'll be another asymmetrical trade. I'm not entirely sure the Israelis are willing, depending on what Hamas's conditions are, to play that game. Part of the problem is that these hostages are not all controlled by Hamas. Palestine Islamic Jihad has some, and reports are true, then some of these families or clans have taken hostages in the wake of October 7th in an effort to trade them for money or some other bargain.
Prime Minister Netanyahu is adamant that fighting will resume when the truce lifts. But is there any universe in which these series of short-term extensions could lead to a longer-term ceasefire to bring this war to a close?
I think the chances of that happening are absolutely zero. That, of course, would hand to get Palestinian prisoners in the process, to pull off the largest terrorist attack in history of the State of Israel and the single bloodiest day for Jews since the Nazi Holocaust. Should such a ceasefire be proposed, I doubt whether the Israelis would accept it. And right now, America's key ally, the Biden administration, doesn't seem to be interested in it either. No, I think the ground campaign, in some fashion, here, I think the Biden administration can have an impact in shaping or reshaping what the Israelis plan to do in Gaza in an effort to try to minimize the tragic deaths of exponential deaths of Palestinians that we've seen and the destruction in northern Gaza.
Israel's goal of rooting out Hamas, that's the objective. What does the mission look like at this point?
If the war stopped, if the war stopped today, the Israelis would have failed. Hamas's military structure above ground, below ground, its leadership remains intact. Even in northern Gaza, where the Israelis have operated, there's still a Hamas presence. So I think the Israeli objective, eradication of Hamas, killing all of its senior leadership, if what the Israelis intend by that is that there will not be residual Hamas presence, and Hamas will not survive in some fashion, some form, even as a political movement, I think that probably is unachievable. The cost here is an issue, and so is the amount of time that the Israelis would have to spend. We're talking not weeks.
Welcome back, y'all.
Strategy. I'm not sure it's achievable. And
Current events with your boy Pocket Full of Dinero Beats while gaming.
It's the embodiment of an idea, and that idea is the destruction of Israel and the creation of an Islamic State. That idea is likely to live on, sadly, tragically, in the minds of too many Palestinians who right now, an entire generation, I think is going to be shaped by this war and traumatized, not to mention the Israelis will also emerge from this conflict traumatized. It doesn't leave much hope or promise for the emergence of leaders on either side to turn this parade of horrors into something that you and I would consider an equitable and durable resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We're much farther from that point in the wake of October 7th, I'm afraid.
Aaron David Miller, thanks as always for your insights.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
September. That is up from the initial estimate of 4.9%. And on Wall Street, stocks mostly drifted. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 13 points to close at 35,430. The Nasdaq fell 23 points, and the S&P 500 was down 4. Still to come on the News Hour, we speak to the families of the Palestinian students who were shot in Vermont. How challenges to the Voting Rights Act could reshape the nation's political landscape, plus much more.
This is the PBS News Hour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
With U.S. allies embroiled in wars overseas, members of Congress face a pivotal decision on whether to greenlight more aid. Congressional correspondent Lisa Desjardins spent the day on Capitol Hill, where a deal could hinge on U.S. border funding. Lisa, good to see you. Hi. So help us understand, this is a little confusing. How are aid to Israel and aid to Ukraine tied at all to what's happening at the U.S. southern border?
This is complicated, so let's try and make it clear. There are two ways these things are tied together. One, himself and his proposal for national security funding. It's the emergency request he has. Let's look at what he's requested from Congress. You'll see all of these things bundled together. Ukraine, with the biggest request from him, about $60 billion more than that. Israel, he wants that money, about $14 billion. For the U.S. border, he's added to that another almost $14 billion and some humanitarian aid. So already he's saying, I want these things together. Politically, essentially, he's saying, I want these Ukraine as money for our allies, but also I understand that there is need for work on our own border. The other reason this is tied together, Ahmed, is timing. Ukraine and Israel both need funding now. We are running out of time in this calendar year. Republicans realize there are not that many must-pass bills left this year. They want border security, so they are also pushing for border security to be part of any kind of package for Israel and Ukraine.
So let's drill down on the border piece then, right? Because this is not an easy issue for Congress to reach consensus on. What's on the table? What could a deal look like?
The last day has really been quite wild in terms of what's happening. There is a small group of U.S. senators trying to forge a compromise. Now, to explain this, it gets very technical, but I want people to understand two very broad concepts that we have in terms of border talks. There are two key terms I want to talk about. You talked about this on here before. Parole. That is something that means that it's temporary and emergency. That's allowing people into this country for brief periods of time. The other is asylum. That is a permanent kind of state. Both of those things are things that Republicans want to limit, some very sharply. Now, I asked Speaker Johnson about this today. How important is it? Are there any red lines for him for what has to happen for border security in order to get Ukraine and Israel money? I want you to listen to his answer for what kind of priority he has for that money.
People are deeply concerned about their safety and security and all the things, all the societal things that happen. So that is a top priority for us in all these negotiations, to get that secured. And we need policy changes, not just further funding to process it.
Okay, he wants policy changes as a top priority. Now, listen a few hours later to a Senate news conference I was at. This is Senator Roger Marshall, how he puts the way he thinks border funding should be involved here.
My priorities 1, 2, and 3 are the border, and the border. And that unless there's meaningful reform that secures our border, we're hell no. We're not going to vote for cloture on any type of legislation, supplemental legislation, unless it includes border security.
In other words, border security or nothing.
So what about the aid to Israel, aid to Ukraine? What's on the table?
There are separate debates there. Let's talk about some divides. Israel. There is a very difficult discussion that Democrats are having over whether there should be conditions for that, perhaps limiting the way Israel uses some weapons that America funds, protecting civilians, somehow codified it. Now, also in Ukraine, there are calls, especially from Republicans, for more checks on spending. They are dubious of some of that money. And then for both of those, there are questions about how much should we give and for how long? Are these endless wars? What kind of limits are there here? Those are difficult discussions to have.
That's a lot to work out and not a lot of time. What's the timeline here?
Okay, here we go. Let's look at the calendar. Just on the verge of December, this is the timeline we're looking at. This is when the Senate is hoping to have a vote on some kind of foreign aid and border bill, maybe next week. But then look at the entire calendar for this year. Congress is only in session next week and the week following it. So it is really hard to do the math to see how they get all of this done. Hope springs eternal, but it's all to say that there has to be a deal essentially this week. And I'll tell you, walking here from the Capitol tonight, it seemed like they're farther away than closer. Senator Chris Murphy, who was involved in that gun deal that we talked about before, he said having a bipartisan compromise on guns was a cakewalk compared to what he's talking about now.
Doesn't look good. You'll be following it all. Before I let you go, you'll be following this other story about Congressman George Santos of New York. Will the House vote to expel him?
It looks like it, but it's not entirely clear yet. Mr. Santos is having a news conference tomorrow. He has said he will not resign. It is still not clear that the votes are there. It takes 2/3 votes in the House to expel him. Clearly, a majority wants to expel him. That vote could happen as soon as tomorrow, but the latest was that they were leaning toward moving it to Friday. It's going to be something we'll watch very closely in the next couple of days.
What's happening in these last 2 weeks before the year ends and Congress leaves? Lisa Desjardins, always good to see you.
You too.
Now we turn to the aftermath of the shooting that happened this past weekend in Burlington, Vermont, where a white man shot 3 young men of Palestinian descent. The attack has again stirred fears of rising Islamophobia and anti-Arab hatred. William Brangham spoke.
See all that BS, man. That's so sad.
Friday night, these 3 college students, Tassin Ahmed, Kinan Abdelhamid, and Hisham Awartani, were shot and wounded by a stranger. The attacker, whose motive is still unknown, has been charged with 3 counts of attempted murder. Earlier today, I spoke with Hisham's mother, Elizabeth Price. She had just arrived in the U.S. from her home in the West Bank, and with Kinan's mother, Tamara Tamimi, who had just arrived from her home in Jerusalem.
Thank you both so much for joining us today. I would love to hear both how your sons are doing right now. Tamara, how is Kinan doing?
He's doing all right. He was discharged the day before yesterday actually. I was able to speak to his ER doctor by phone. The hospital has been amazing in giving us information. The bullet that the defendant hit Kinan with grazed his right glute, and it didn't penetrate deeply, so he was incredibly lucky. He is, however, in a lot of pain. The adrenaline of all of this has suddenly subsided, and so he's having trouble sleeping. I'm very anxious to get to him because I have a feeling he's not just having trouble sleeping because of pain, but because of trauma. So I'm quite concerned.
Dang.
But otherwise, he was incredibly lucky, and he sits with a lot of concern for his friends that are still in the hospital.
And Elizabeth, I know Hisham was also quite seriously injured. What is the latest on his prognosis?
Well, he has what they call an incomplete spinal injury, which means that he has sensation in his legs, but he can't move them. From what I heard today, talking with my husband, the bullet hit his clavicle, and we're grateful that it hit his clavicle, because if it hadn't, it might very well have just plowed through his spine and killed him. I mean, we're just so grateful that they're alive. I mean, we're just so thankful. And it makes such a difference. We're going to go see them, we're going to hug them, we're going to be with them, they're going to get sick of us, and I don't know if I'll let go of them for a while, because it was a hair's breadth away from death, and when I believe in my son. I believe that he will be able to walk again, but you can't bring a child back from death.
I mean, as the country has focused on the tragedy that fell to your sons, everyone has been seeing these photographs of them as little boys knowing each other, obviously for many, many years. Can you just tell us a little bit about the relationship between these 3 young men?
Sure. So, Hisham and Kinan in particular have grown up together. So Elizabeth was pregnant with best friends. Elizabeth and I were pregnant very close in time. So we were friends first, and then the 2 babies were born being friends because, quite frankly, they had no choice, because we were always hanging out, and so the boys were hanging out. So they will tell you, if you ask them, that they're actually more brothers than they are just friends. The 3rd boy that was with them is very, very close to them as well. He met them when I think they were in 4th grade, and the 3 of them are very, very like-minded, and they're the kind of boys that spend hours and hours and hours together, huddled with their heads together in a room, just talking about everything, talking about science, physics, astronomy, astrology, talking about playing chess. So they really grew up
as an inseparable team.
Exactly.
The night of the attack, the boys were walking down a quiet residential street to dinner at a family's house, when their attacker approached them, said nothing, and opened fire.
Well, he came off the property and approached them. They stood to the side to let him pass. They were probably walking down in a row. And he pulled out his gun, didn't say a word, shot them. I think Kinan was able to turn and run, to flee. I think from what Lamar has described, he was shot, so the man continued to shoot while Kinan was fleeing. Hisham and his friend fell to the ground. Hisham said that all of a sudden he found himself on the ground and didn't know he'd been shot. And he pulled his phone out of his pocket and had blood on it. His friend was lying next to him screaming in pain. And Hisham called the ambulance, called 911, and then the EMT came.
Kinan, who is also trained as an EMT, ran for safety on the street.
I understand that Kinan thought that his friends were dead, and And whereas, her family thought that Kenan was dead. So, you can understand the trauma.
Can imagine having to go through that experience and fearing for your friends and not being certain what happened to them. As you know, there is still no quote-unquote stated motive for this attack. But you both clearly believe that your sons were targeted because they're Palestinian. Is that correct?
Two of the three of them were wearing the traditional kufiya. And if he was close enough to within earshot, they were also speaking a mix of Arabic and English, as they tend to do. Our boys were, don't typically walk around with a kufiya, but right now, in solidarity with what's happening to the Palestinian people, many Palestinians and other supporters of the Palestinian people are wearing the kufiya to recognize and be in solidarity with those who are suffering in Gaza. I find it very, very difficult to believe that this was completely random, and I can say even further that if our boys looked like the assailant, if our boys spoke like him, if our boys were dressed exactly like him, I have a very hard time believing that this shooting would have happened. And in all cases, this was definitely motivated by hate. No one can do an act like this that isn't entirely fueled by hate.
So I don't think they're surprised by what happened, because I think they've been on edge and they felt like they've been targeted, and they've seen the targeting. I mean, the killing of that young boy a few weeks ago, beginning of in October, means that there is a context in which this crime happened, and as Tamara said, it was a hate-driven crime because he did something so hateful to young men who he had no contact with before. So it was a vicious attack on them as they were standing there, and based on how he perceived their identities.
All right, Elizabeth Price and Tamara Timimi, thank you both so much, and we are wishing you a wonderful reunion with your son later today.
We're looking forward to it. We're gonna hold them and not let go. They'll be like squirming to get out, right? Or maybe not.
Thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you.
Coastal cities in Southeast Asia, including Bangkok, Jakarta, and Manila, face a mutually risky future. They are sinking as sea levels around them are rising. Psn Lazaro has our report from Thailand.
Just 30 miles from Thailand's capital, Bangkok, sits a temple on a small spit of land. The only way in is to walk or hitch a ride with a motorcyclist along a narrow concrete footbridge.
Over my shoulder here are about 2.5 miles of what is today the Gulf of Thailand. As recently as the mid-1990s, this was the village of Samut Chin.
Community leader Suwan Waplai points to the lines of what were once power poles disappearing into the distance, marking roads which once connected houses, farms, and markets in a thriving fishing village.
Wow. The soil here erodes by 1.5 to 2 inches every year. People have had to move houses 6 or 7 times because the water has kept coming in.
50-year-old Waplai has been fishing since he was 10.
There's been a decline in mangrove forests, which has led to quite a few species of fish and shellfish disappearing almost entirely.
Slowly, he says, the buffer zone that shielded the capital from the worst is eroding away.
Bangkok has a natural reservoir for water, and if the water comes in, it's very hard for it to get out. If there's
And the fact is that more leaflets have been dropped for the rest of the south, informing them to move to Rafah district in the far south of the Gaza Strip, due to the fact that Israel says that Khan Yunis city will be a center for the Israeli operations within the coming days, which exacerbates the situation right now on the ground in the south of the territory.
Earlier, we heard from a senior Hamas official, Osama Hamdan. He's warned that the Israeli army will not achieve its aims in Gaza.
The stubbornness of the Israeli forces in continuing to attack Gaza prevented and hindered the negotiation process. The enemy is back to committing crimes. The enemy has not allowed the ceasefire to be extended. We can confirm that the aggression must stop if negotiations over hostage exchanges are to resume. Otherwise, no talks are possible.
Well, let's take you over now to the occupied West Bank and speak to Al Jazeera's Zain Basrawi, who joins us from Ramallah. So Zain, tell us first about the latest Israeli attacks there, one on a hospital, we understand.
That's right. We're hearing reports. First of all, I'll give you an update on the latest we're hearing. We're hearing reports quoting the Al-Qassam brigades that a majority, according to them, of Israeli military forces have withdrawn from the northern part of the Gaza Strip, calling their operations their failures. They're saying as much as 70% of the contingency in the northern part of the Gaza Strip has withdrawn. That's according to the Al-Qassam brigade. We're also hearing reports of some Israeli casualties, though those numbers remain unconfirmed. Now, at the moment, we're also hearing that the Israeli military carried out an attack on another hospital. They're targeting another hospital. The Kamal Adwan.
So you gotta see it from both sides. If they want you to worry about this stuff, don't worry about it from one side to another. You gotta do your own research about it, dog. Like, that's why I don't be trying to pick sides on that, on everything, dog. And sometimes it don't matter at the end of the day. They just do that stuff to get us distracted, dog. That's it. That's why I try to objectively look at stuff. Don't put my personal feelings in it. None of that. You just gotta look at it from both sides. But we as Americans, we shouldn't be worried about it. Our prayers and everything goes out to everybody, but just me personally, shouldn't be worried about certain things, you know?
Across the Gaza Strip remain out of service. Some have resumed partial operation as fuel supplies have been making it in, but 20 still remain out of service. And meanwhile, the bombardment across the Gaza Strip has continued, and Israeli forces continue to push everybody from the north to the south, continue to push and pressure communities there, dropping leaflets saying that their next target is going to be Khan Yunis, that will begin to become the major area of operations.
We start the game.
For the past several days, for the past 24 to 48 hours, especially among the people panicking in and around the area, as so many people have moved, so many people, thousands displaced, as Israel continues to push people from the north to the south of Gaza.
And Zain, in the occupied West Bank where you are, we're hearing now of more overnight raids by Israeli forces. Tell us more about that.
That is correct. Dozens more, 60 people have been detained across the occupied West Bank in the last day or so. We're hearing of a raid west of Jenin in a village. Israeli armored vehicles have been targeted by pipe bombs there. Jenin, of course, is a stronghold for armed resistance and armed groups in the occupied West Bank. We're also hearing of confrontations north of Tulkarm. Tulkarm seen of 5 major raids carried out in that city since the war on Gaza began, since the events of October the 7th. And that we see a continuation of tension in Tulkarm. And we're also hearing of ongoing raids in Kufratin, southeast of Kalkilia, and that's still ongoing this evening.
Zain Basrawi, live for us in Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Thank you. Efforts to renew the ceasefire in Gaza are still underway. Majid Mohammed Al-Ansari, the spokesperson for the Qatari Foreign Ministry, told Al Jazeera mediators are trying to ensure the lines of communication remain open between Israel and Hamas. On Saturday, Israel pulled out its negotiating team from the talks taking place in Doha.
Undoubtedly, the negotiation process has been one of the most challenging mediation efforts for Qatar. Consultations are currently underway with all regional and international partners before we return to the negotiation table. The Israeli occupation's bombardment in southern Gaza makes it challenging to deliver aid. Today, a gun was fired at one of the delivery drivers transporting aid in the south. Also, the continuous targeting of ambulances in these convoys
East Jerusalem for us. So, Hamda, since the resumption of fighting, Israel has pretty much been doing what it said it would do.
Well, the Israelis have had this military plan since before the ceasefire even began, and all throughout the 1 week where there was the pause in the fighting, the Israelis were constantly updating their battle plans and procedures, saying that this is exactly what they were going to do. The Israeli military chief of staff, Herzi Halevi, speaking to troops earlier today, said that they're going to operate on a ground invasion in the southern part of the Gaza Strip. They've already begun operating in the south, all while they continue to deepen their operations in the northern part of Gaza. He said that the operation in the south and the military type of activity that will happen there will be almost equal to what we saw happening in the north. And remember, there are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who have fled their homes to southern parts of the territory. People who have been displaced multiple times, now not knowing where to go as the Israelis continue to bombard every single part of the Gaza Strip. Now, the Israeli army spokesperson, Daniel Hagari, also speaking tonight, said that the Israelis are tracking every single Hamas field commander in Gaza, and they were looking to eliminate each and every single one of them, singling out Yahya Sinwar. Additionally, he said that the ground operations are going to expand and that the military is prepared for anything and that they have the, quote, strength and the capabilities to do so. All of this comes as there was immense pressure on the Israelis by the United States, specifically when Secretary of State Antony Blinken was in Israel last week, telling the Israelis that they absolutely cannot operate in the south the same way they operated in the north, given the dire humanitarian situation that has unfolded and the rising civilian casualties. Now, it is seemingly proving that the Israelis are not regarding any of this. However, an anonymous diplomatic source speaking to Israeli media says that they, quote, modified their plans for the South at the request of the Americans. However, the reality on the ground is already showing a different picture. Just look at how many deaths there have been in the last 24 hours in Gaza. Additionally, remember, the Israelis have been saying that they have 3 goals for this war: the complete dismantling of Hamas's military and political capabilities, to bring back all of the captives, and to ensure that Israel feels no threat coming from the Gaza Strip. But even though this war has been going on for 58 days, the Israelis have not accomplished any of those goals. They have brought back some of the captives, but remember, it was in exchange for a pause in the fighting, for humanitarian aid, for the release of Palestinian prisoners. Additionally, the Israelis are saying that they are in full control of the northern part of the Gaza Strip and have been echoing that sentiment for weeks. However, we have seen Hamas firing rockets from the northern part of the territory continuously. So the Israelis are contradicting themselves because they are not achieving the military goals that they are hoping to. And it's really yet to be seen what they are hoping to accomplish with this ground operation. But what we're seeing on the ground just in the last 24 to 36 hours is showing a really gruesome and grim picture of life in Gaza.
Indeed, and Hamda, on the issue of getting back more Israeli captives, what's the Israeli public been saying about that? Because we know the families have been very vocal that is the priority, and of course that possibility ended once the fighting resumed.
The issue of Israeli captives is the most sensitive and important in Israeli society, and there has been immense pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu's government and the Israeli army to get them all back. There were also hopes that the ceasefire period would extend for additional days because the Israelis were hoping to release all civilian women and children under the framework of that deal. But a lot of families are still disappointed that there are no deals on the table and that the Israeli army and defense officials alike have been repeating that there will be no more deals like this, that any sort of negotiations are going to happen under fire. So the Israeli public and families of the captives are frustrated. Additionally, there is a fear that some of their loved ones will die in the continued Israeli bombardment in the Gaza Strip. So while there is this pressure on the Israeli government and the Israeli army, not just on the home front, but from abroad, the Israelis are not seeming to change their characterizations and the steps that they are going to do, or they say they are going to do militarily in the Gaza Strip. So, I mean, we also heard from the
I'll be back, y'all. I'm about to go. I'm about to handle something. 2 minutes, real quick. 2 minutes.
difficult. And the Israeli public is hoping not just really to bring back the captives, but they're hoping for that as soon as possible. But it doesn't seem like that will happen anytime soon.
All right, Hamda Salhut updating from occupied East Jerusalem. Thank you. Mohammed Al-Masri is with the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. He says this escalation was predicted.
Goals for this war, the complete dismantling of Hamas's military and political capabilities, to bring back all of the captives, and to ensure that Israel feels no threat coming from the Gaza Strip. But even though this war has been going on for 58 days, the Israelis have not accomplished any of those goals. They have brought back some of the captives, but remember, it was in exchange for a pause in the fighting, for humanitarian aid, for the release of Palestinian prisoners. Additionally, the Israelis are saying that they are in full control of the northern part of the Gaza Strip and have been echoing that sentiment for weeks. However, we have seen Hamas firing rockets from the northern part of the territory continuously. So the Israelis are contradicting themselves because they're not achieving the military goals that they are hoping to. And it's really yet to be seen what they are hoping to accomplish with this ground operation. But what we're seeing on the ground just in the last 24 to 36 hours is showing a really gruesome and grim picture of life in Gaza.
Indeed, and Hamda, on the issue of getting back more Israeli captives, what's the Israeli public been saying about that? Because we know the families have been very vocal that is the priority, and of course that possibility ended once the fighting resumed.
The issue of Israeli captives is the most sensitive and important in Israeli society, and there has been immense pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu's government and the Israeli army.
Scientists estimate that creating a traversable wormhole would require a far greater amount of energy than anything we can produce today. But there is a theory that so-called exotic matter may provide the key to unlocking wormhole travel.
What you need is matter with negative mass. And we're only aware of matter with positive mass, so we call this exotic matter. Not that it couldn't exist, we're just not aware of it yet. The bottom line is it takes huge amounts of energy to create these. Imagine taking all of Jupiter now, its entire mass, and converting that to energy. You know, you're talking millions and millions of times more energy than you have in a nuclear bomb.
Although most scientists say that we're a long way from developing the technology to create wormholes, if such a thing is even possible at all, there are those who believe these celestial shortcuts already exist. In 1991, scientists at Vanderbilt University proposed that the chaos of the Big Bang not only created the universe, but also may have caused the formation of many wormholes billions of years ago.
During the Big Bang, space-time itself was being mashed together, expanded, contracted. And one theory says that if you had something like the size of the Himalaya Mountains, the space-time around it could have been so badly stressed that it would mash this matter inside its own event horizon. In the same way, you can imagine space-time being mashed together and forming a mini wormhole.
The possible result, according to researchers, would be a wormhole about the size of an atom. Once located, these mini wormholes could possibly be stretched to create a traversable wormhole.
One of the things we know is that since the Big Bang, the universe has been expanding, which means space-time overall has been stretching. So if the universe is quite small, you make a teeny little wormhole. As that whole structure stretches, the whole wormhole stretches and grows big as well. So you could end up with a very large wormhole now.
If wormholes were created in the earliest stages of the universe, is it possible, as some ancient astronaut theorists suggest, that celestial beings have already used them to travel to Earth in the distant past.
It's very possible that wormholes or stargates opening and beings coming through them are a way to explain how man was interacting with the ancient gods.
Chihuahua, Mexico. Just 125 miles from the Texas border. This vast archaeological site, situated near the base of the Sierra Madre Occidental mountain range, dates back to 1200 AD. Known as both Paquime and Casas Grandes, only part of the extensive remains, estimated to contain more than 2,000 clay rooms, have been excavated, revealing a well-planned city containing plazas, stores, workshops, and multi-story residential buildings with an advanced water and sewage system.
Paquime, or Casas Grandes, is larger than any other site for hundreds of miles in any direction. And there's an interesting melding of different cultures. In some aspects, it's a very Mesoamerican or Aztec city. In other regards, it's a very Pueblo or Southwest culture city.
At its height, Paquime is believed to have had a population of more than 10,000. But this thriving pre-Columbian civilization declined and mysteriously disappeared by the 16th century. While no one knows exactly who the inhabitants of Paquime were, it is believed that their descendants may be the indigenous people of the region, known as the Tarahumara. The Tarahumara now live high up in the canyons of the Sierra Madre, and much of what is known about the ancient city of Paquime comes from the stories passed down to them from their ancestors. According to their legends, Paquime is a sacred place where star people have appeared for centuries. Described as light, tall, and blonde, the Tarahumara say these mysterious beings emerged from doorways in the ruins.
The Tarahumara truly believe that the star people exist still today in the Chihuahua Desert. They believe that these tall, blonde people represent maybe the heirs of the star people that first brought them to this world. They believe that there is a portal and that these star people use this portal today to transport to various places on the Earth and off-world as well.
Throughout the architecture of Paquime are hundreds of uniquely T-shaped openings. Openings that closely resemble an ancient doorway more than 4,000 miles away in southern Peru. Here, perched high in the Andes Mountains, this shallow T-shaped opening, called the Doorway of Amaru Muru, is surrounded by many legends describing it as an active portal that transports beings both into and out of this world.
This could be a coincidence if it weren't for the fact that at Paquime there are strange stories of the appearance of these Caucasian-like beings. And there are very similar stories to do with this Gate of the Gods in Peru.
It's possible that this does represent a Stargate location in which extraterrestrial humans are seen as coming and going during certain opportune points in the year when the Stargate becomes active.
Considering the similar doorways and legends of otherworldly beings at Paquime and Amaru Muru, is it possible that extraterrestrials once accessed these ancient sites through stargates? Some ancient astronaut theorists say that not only were stargates present at places like Paquime and Amaru Muru in the distant past, but that there may be functioning stargates here on Earth, even today. The Sargasso Sea. Stretching 700 miles wide and 2,000 miles long, this strange body of water is completely isolated in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean. It is a sea without shores, surrounded by some of the strongest currents in the world. And due to a number of unexplained incidents that have occurred here, it has earned the nicknames Sea of Lost Ships, the Calms of Death, and the Sea of Fear. And curiously, although the waters around it are violent, the Sargasso Sea itself is calm.
The water is unusually blue, mysterious, as if the currents don't affect this one area, as if the winds stop, or as if time stands still.
Back in the time of sailing ships, if sailing ships went into this area, they could not necessarily get out, and they were seen as sort of being trapped by the Sargasso Sea.
Boats will be found perfectly intact there, but the crew will have disappeared without a trace. Now, why would that be? because it's strange since the Sargasso Sea is known for its calm waters.
Perhaps the oldest known and most famous disappearance reported from the Sargasso Sea occurred in August 1840, when a merchant ship called the Rosalie was traveling from Germany to Cuba. According to the London Times, when it was discovered drifting aimlessly, the vessel was completely abandoned, although perfectly intact, with the sails still set. What happened to the Rosalie remains a mystery. But similar occurrences have continued to plague the Sargasso Sea for centuries.
In 1881, a ship by the name of the Ellen Austin found a derelict schooner in the Sargasso Sea. They put a crew aboard it and sailed in tandem back towards London for several days. About 2 days later, the schooner was found to be sailing erratically, and when it was boarded again, that crew had also disappeared, absolutely into thin air. It was as if the people were simply beamed out of it.
It is also interesting to note that the Sargasso Sea is directly in contact with the area we call the Bermuda Triangle. There may be some type of Stargate or portal activation in this area.
Could the reports of strange disappearances occurring in the Sargasso Sea, and also in the Bermuda Triangle that overlaps this body of water, be explained by the presence of a Stargate? Ancient astronaut theorists believe further evidence can be found deep within one of North America's largest lakes. Lake Michigan, stretching across this 22,300 square mile body of water. From Manitowoc, Wisconsin to Ludington and Benton Harbor, Michigan, is another mysterious area known as the Michigan Triangle. Like the Sargasso Sea, this portion of the massive freshwater lake has been associated with bizarre and puzzling disappearances.
In 1937, there was a freighter named the McFarland, which passed through the Michigan Triangle. The captain of the ship went to his cabin to get some sleep, told his second mate to come and awaken him at a specific time. When the second mate knocked on the door, there was no answer. The door was locked from the inside, they broke in, and the captain had simply disappeared. None of the portholes were open, none of the windows were open, there was no way for the captain to have gotten out of the ship.
They never could find the guy. Did he jump off the ship? Who knows, but the ship was exactly in this triangle in Lake Michigan.
But ships aren't the only crafts affected by this area of Lake Michigan. There are accounts of as many as 40 planes that have disappeared in the Michigan Triangle. In 1950, 13 years after the captain of the McFarland went missing, Northwest Airlines Flight 2501, carrying 55 passengers and 3 crew, disappeared as it passed over the Michigan Triangle. The wreckage has never been discovered, and investigations continue to this day.
No wreckage was ever found. The families have been despondent over it. They continue to look for the wreckage. There's a monument to them on the shores of Lake Michigan, but not a trace. Not a belt buckle, not a wallet, not a chair. Nothing from the aircraft has ever been found. And the area was searched for 6 days afterwards. It's been searched extensively by salvagers in the decades since, and no one has ever found a thing.
Ships have been there, they've disappeared. Airplanes have flown into the region, they've disappeared.
These aircraft and ships are just gone. Now, for me, the very fact that they are totally vanished, that makes me think that possibly they've been sucked into some form of wormhole and unfortunately get trapped on the other side.
Could the murky waters of Lake Michigan actually be hiding the entrance to a wormhole, as some researchers suggest? Might that explain why there has been such peculiar phenomenon here, including countless sightings of strange unidentified flying objects, both overhead and coming from below the surface?
There have been witnesses that have actually seen green glowing discs fly up out of the lake. They've seen blue spherical objects fly into the lake.
Gateways through space and time will have a luminous quality. They will appear as spherical formations of plasma. It seems that certain areas of water are often where these portals are naturally forming. It's possible that extraterrestrials may have been accessing that area, and in fact, it may still be active today, thus accounting for these UFO sightings and all the bizarre disappearances.
These areas are very inaccessible. The whole concept of some of these stargates and portals being actually underwater makes a lot of sense.
It's possible that there's a network of underwater portals spread throughout the world.
These portals could be accessed by extraterrestrial beings who use them to come and go from the stars.
Could there be stargates hidden deep within our lakes and oceans that extraterrestrials might still be using even to this day? And if so, might humans one day be able to access these stargates as well? Some scientists believe that not only will we travel through stargates which already exist, but that we may even be close to creating them ourselves. Cal State Fullerton.
Period would extend for additional days because the Israelis were hoping to release all civilian women and children under the framework of that deal. But a lot of families are still disappointed that there are no deals on the table and that the Israeli army and defense officials alike have been repeating that there will be no more deals like this, that any sort of negotiations are going to happen under fire. So the Israeli public and families of the captives are frustrated. Additionally, there is a fear that some of their loved ones will die in the continued Israeli bombardment in the Gaza Strip. So while there is this pressure on the Israeli government and the Israeli army, not just on the home front, but from abroad, the Israelis are not seeming to change their characterizations and the steps that they are going to do, or they say they are going to do militarily in the Gaza Strip. So, we also heard from the Qatari mediators who said that the continued bombardment is going to make any sort of negotiations more difficult. And the Israeli public is hoping not just really to bring back the captives, but they're hoping for that as soon as possible. But it doesn't seem like that will happen anytime soon.
All right, Hamda Salhut updating us there from occupied East Jerusalem. Thank you. Now, Mohammed Al-Masri is with the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. He says this escalation was predicted by many analysts.
After Israel systematically, forcibly displaced people into the south, it was inevitable that there were going to be mass casualties in the south because of how densely populated the area is, and also because Israel tends to target civilian infrastructure. So it's tragic, but it was all predictable.
And Israel has said that its goal is to eradicate Hamas. And I suppose, can they even do that, first of all, physically to Hamas? And even if they could, Hamas is also it's an idea. It's a movement. You can't bomb a movement into smithereens, can you?
Yeah, you're tapping into what many people have been saying for 8 weeks, which is that first of all, you can't eradicate an idea. Hamas is a resistance idea. So even if you were to, in theory, if you were to kill all 35 or 40,000 members of Hamas, which is extremely unlikely, you would simply be creating more members of Hamas or some other resistance movement. So in that sense, it was always an unwinnable goal by the Israeli military. But I think we have to remember what the Israeli military has been saying and the government has been saying since the start. They said we want to turn Gaza into an island of ruins, into a city of tents. They said we will eliminate everything. They said we are interested in damage and not accuracy. They said they are going to make no distinctions between civilians and members of Hamas. These are all direct quotes, pretty much, or close paraphrases of top Israeli officials. So Israel has stuck to its plan. It's trying to not eradicate Hamas so much as it is trying to get rid of all of the Gazan population.
The Pentagon says a U.S. warship has destroyed Houthi drones and missiles in the southern Red Sea. The U.S. says 2 drones and 4 missiles were launched from Houthi-held territory in Yemen. The Houthi movement confirmed that it targeted 2 ships on Sunday, saying both were linked to Israel. But an Israeli military spokesman has denied either vessel has an Israeli connection.
Our forces will continue to prevent all the Israeli ships from sailing in the Arab and Red Sea until all the aggression against Gaza stops. The Yemeni armed forces continue to warn all the Israeli naval ships and all ships linked to Israel that they will become a legitimate target if they refuse to comply.
Mohammed al-Basha is a senior
Haven't played this one in
research firm Navanti Group. He says Houthi attacks are part of a wider axis of resistance and a response to Israel's continuing war on Gaza.
Houthis are, like they call themselves, are delivering on their promises that they're going to be targeting ships that are linked to Israel, either to Israeli entities, businessmen, or ships that are moving cargo in and out of the state of Israel. I think today's incident, the situation is still fluid. Details are coming in, trickling in. Whether the two ships were linked or not linked to any Israeli companies. But at the end of the day, the Houthis are delivering on their promises that they're going to continue to target Israeli ships. They've hijacked the Galaxy Leader, which was linked to, a week ago, was linked to an Israeli billionaire. And they will continue most likely also to fire drones and cruise missiles on Israel, even though it's not effective because of the air defense regional system. But it's very symbolic at this point. There's two things happening at first. During the pause and the ceasefire, the Houthis have paused all attacks on Israel, either with the cruise missiles or drones, and they also have paused the maritime operations targeting Israeli vessels. So that tells me that according to what they say, that they are part of the axis of resistance, which here in DC is linked to the Iranian threat network, that they are coordinating operations. So I could assume now that perhaps more proximity precise airstrikes will be linked to Hezbollah, to entities like Hamas, to the Palestinian Jihad. And the Houthis, with their current capabilities, are going to be focusing more on the Red Sea. So definitely there's coordination within the axis.
Joyce Kadam is a senior editor at El Monitor, an independent source of Middle East news and analysis. She says Joe Biden's administration is facing growing pressure to limit Israel's war on Gaza.
This is turning to be a highly problematic situation for the Biden administration. What we've heard from Vice President Harris and Secretary Austin is the most vocal public pressure in 58 days from Washington on Israel. But when you look at the war, the Biden administration is failing on series of objectives in pressuring Israel. Washington wanted to extend the truce.
Yeah, this one I definitely need 2 players at least on.
Washington wants to limit civilian casualties. It's not happening. What we've seen in 48 hours, over 700 Palestinians dead. That's more than the number that we've seen in phase 1 of the operation, where it took 4 days to get to 700 Palestinians. So when it comes to civilian casualties, the Biden administration has said in private conversations,
We gonna hold that down. I'm out.
with the Israelis,
Peace.
it wants them to be more attuned to its concerns, to use its military tools, its intelligence tools to limit those, but it's simply not happening on the ground. So expect this issue to be more to go more public as pressure from Congress, as pressure particularly from Senate Democrats grows on the administration.
Still ahead on Al Jazeera, a state of unprecedented devastation. Rights groups warn about the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza.
Pocket full of dinero beats.